Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our talk today on electronic records for Electronic Records Day. Electronic records management now more than ever. My name is Jackie Diorio. I'm a records analyst at the University of California Office of the President, and I'm here to introduce your speakers. As a quick logistical note, we ask that you all keep yourselves muted for the duration of the presentations. We also ask that you hold your questions until the end and then put them in the chat box, and we will make sure we get to as many of them as we can. We have a bunch of great speakers today. We'll be talking on a variety of topics, so I'll quickly introduce them. Our first speaker is Marlena Christensen. She'll be talking about the history in the archives. She's the University Archivist for UC San Diego. She's actually been with UC since 1999 and has been with her current role since 2016. After that, we'll move to talk about records management. Our first speaker will be Lori Sletton. She's the overall records manager for UCOP and the head of the UC Records Management Committee. And she's actually been working in records management for over 30 years. Then we'll hear from Kelly Walker and Carolyn Tuft. Kelly Walker is the Information Practices Coordinator and Campus Records Manager for the Office of Campus Counsel and the Interim Chief Administrative Officer for the Vice Chancellor's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for UC Davis. I don't think she's busy at all. Carolyn Tuft is the Assistant Director for Business Intelligence for Real Estate at UC San Francisco and used to be the Senior Digital Project Manager. Then we will move to learn about privacy from Pegah Parsi, who's the Campus Privacy Officer at UC San Diego. She manages a diverse portfolio of privacy initiatives related to employees, students, applicants, alumni, and more. Last but not least, we'll hear from David Rusting. He's the Chief Information Security Officer for UCOP and oversees cybersecurity for the whole system to protect us from a variety of cyber menaces. Alrighty, so with that, let's have Marlena take it away.
One of my monitors is not coming in. So many buttons. I'm assuming you can hear me now. Is that true?
Yes.
All right, great. All right. Welcome, everyone. I want to be the first to welcome you to our Electronic Records Day webinar. I'm Marlena Christensen, and the University Archivist at UC San Diego. So I want to talk a little bit today about the archives and your part in history. In 1963, nearly 100 years. The following year, the university librarians were instructed by the president to establish a local campus archives and to appoint an archivist who would be responsible for the collection, preservation, management, and use of inactive UC records of enduring value. The university archives are housed with the special collections material on each campus. And each university archivist seeks records which illustrate campus life, record events, and provide insight and evidence of the campus's operations and achievements. So when you hear the word archives, do you initially think of rows of boxes of paper? Well, yes, we do collect those materials, but more and more we receive disks, drives, and memory cards on fixed media. We collect email, websites, podcasts, and social media posts. And after we receive the records, we review them, describe, and preserve the materials for public use. In your daily operations, I'm assuming you produce correspondence, reports, newsletters, presentations, minutes, announcements, organizational charts, promotional materials, photos, audio and video recordings, and many other records that may be suitable for the archives. But for today, let's focus on the care and life cycle of the digital versions of these records. So what tools were used to create and store these digital records? You used software to produce and to read the files, and then they were stored on your computer or maybe a network or cloud drive a portable thumb drive or a hard drive, or perhaps you burned them out onto a CD or DVD. And how many of you remember floppy disks? Do you have any of those still? Well, maybe your records may even be sitting on your cell phone or your tablet. And slide. There we go. Perhaps you produced and simply shared the information through email, instant messaging, and meeting tools like Slack, Skype, Zoom, Teams, or Meet. Or you shared it on social media sites like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok, or posted to your department's blogs or websites. We generate loads of information using a myriad number of tools and distribute it in an expanding number of ways. Today, I'd like to share a few ideas and tips, which I hope will help you to identify and organize some of your electronic records. To begin, let's focus on the end of the retention period for your records. By planning and organizing your records with the end in mind, you'll have more control over your records. And some of the following tips I've borrowed and adapted from the Council of State Archivists guide entitled Tips for Working with Electronic Records. First, review the record's retention schedule. Know which retention period applies to the category of documents you hold and plan for the appropriate disposition. The disposition option include keeping permanently or delete and destroying at the end of the retention period. But some of these categories of records are also subject to university archives review. In these instances, you should contact your campus archivist for more information. In addition to the retention schedule, there may be laws which apply to some of the records. The most common examples are the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or otherwise known as HIPAA, which applies to medical records, and the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, also known as FERPA, pertaining to student records. Some grant funding agencies may also have record retention requirements, so you need to know what applies to your records. And if you need help, contact your campus records manager for more information. Second, organization is key, especially when you're working in a shared environment. Establish a file structure and document it so everyone can follow it. The filing system is not defined or is too complex, people will find a workaround it. Another help for keeping files organized is to make rules. Establish descriptive naming conventions, file organization, version control, and disposition strategies. Ensure all staff members know and follow the rules. Designate someone who oversees and monitors and periodically cleans up the file structure. Schedule a regular file cleanup day. This activity is for everyone and applies equally to paper and digital records. Reviewing files on a regular basis helps you to keep things organized and may identify changes needed in your file structure. Most importantly, it gives you an opportunity to destroy, delete, or transfer the records to the archives as appropriate. Next, think about those old records that have long been lurking in the deep recesses of your department digital files. Can you still open them, or do they need software that you haven't used since 2010? Maybe even earlier. Are they stored on a media that you can still read? Do you have a floppy drive on your computer? Have they degraded over time? If you need to retain records for a long period of time or permanently, you need to look at ways to store them in a stable standard format, like a PDF-A or a TIFF file, a JPEG, or a WAV. Check your records regularly to ensure that you can still open them. Establish a plan for migrating records to new or updated systems and formats that can be accessed when needed. Don't forget about backups. Does your backup system work? How well will it actually restore your electronic documents? And can you retrieve individual items? It's always good to test all of your assumptions. And then keep your personal records separate from your work materials. The easiest strategy is to have all of your personal things go to a personal account and not to blend them at all. But if you do have personal correspondence in your email, sequester it or tag it as it comes in. Then when you're ready to clean up your files, they're already identified and ready for whatever the next step may be. Last, start a conversation with your university archivist. See what types of records your archives collect. Plan the next steps and start reviewing those old inactive files. As you establish a file structure, you'll find it easier to regularly clear your files, and this is a great time to start. So, as I was prepping for today, I asked the university archivists from each campus what message they wanted me to share with you.
You're muted, Marilina. Still muted.
Can
There
you
you
hear
go.
me now?
Yes.
All right. So unanimously and number one on the list, email is a record. In the past, offices kept important letters in correspondence and subject files, and many of those files came to the archives. We get a lot of background information from these files. It often provides details and clues behind the bigger decision events that happen on our campuses. Well, it's been a while since we've had to rely exclusively on the Postal Service or for our business communications. We've migrated to email as a standard method of conducting business long ago. Without email correspondence, we are losing critical aspects of our campus history. So please organize your email and tag and file important messages and topics for transfer to the archives in the future. But I have heard from people that they're reluctant to share their email because they're concerned about including messages that may contain sensitive or personal content. Let me reassure you that an archive staff member reviews the records transferred before making them publicly available for use. We consistently search for private, confidential, sensitive, and protected information in all of the materials we receive. As needed, we may restrict access to information for a period of time or redact the sensitive content. This is especially true for email. Two things that you can do to help with this is to review and organize your email prior to sending it to the archives, which includes removing those personal messages. And two, prepare a list of keywords, names, or topics for staff to specifically be searching for while they process. Second on the archivist list is passwords and login credentials for any locked or encrypted computers, documents, files, or drives that are transferred to the archives. We prefer that you unlock them before sending the records, or at least share the passwords used to secure the information. We don't want passwords and encryption to prevent us from collecting and preserving that important campus information. So in conclusion, now is the time to organize and manage your records with the end in mind. Understand your record responsibilities. Develop a file structure that will facilitate your records management efforts. And remember, email is a record. We collect it. And consult with the records manager and the university archivist if you have questions. So, wouldn't you like to know what their story was? Without your records, our history is limited or disappearing. So help us tell the whole story. If you'd like more information about your campus archives, please visit your library's website or contact your local university archivist. Thank you for your time and attention this morning.
So good morning. Thank you for joining us today. The records management part of the session is what is called what is electronic records management and what is in it for you. My name is Lori Sletton and I'm the UCOP records manager. Joining me today are Kelly Walker from UC Davis and Carolyn Tuff from UC San Francisco. So these are the frequently asked questions for us. What is records management? What is electronic records management? And is there any general guidance for how long to keep records? Here at UC, we have policies that govern the university's records management program that are found in the Records Management and Privacy Series. RMP is what that's called. So in RMP 1, which is titled University Records Management Program, defines the records management program at UC as to ensure records, I'm paraphrasing, ensure records can be easily retrieved when required and disposed of in accordance with policy, law, and contracts. The program consists of the following types of components. This isn't all inclusive, but creation, organization of, and access to records, maintenance and retention, security and privacy, preservation of records of historical importance, disposition of records when they no longer serve their purpose, and other functions that may be deemed necessary for good records management. What is electronic records management? Our definition for records, which is found in RMP 2, says that it's pretty much anything, regardless of physical form or characteristics, that is used to transact the business of the university. So regardless of physical form and characteristics, implies that it's also for those electronic records. So our records management program does include the management of electronic records. The third question, are there any general guidance? Is there any general guidance for how long to keep records? And I have a poll that I want to give to see if you all are aware of the UC records retention schedule. Go ahead and fill out the poll. Okay, I'm going to stop it for the brevity of time. And share the results. So we have a lot more people knowing about the records retention than don't. That's great. So this is the records retention schedule. It can be found at recordsretention.ucop.edu. I've put a red box around some of the information in the schedule found at that website. This information includes a list of those records that are not included in the retention schedule, such as the Regental records, library materials, faculty research and teaching materials, student examinations, and records pertaining to individual patient care. Also in that section, there is a link to a recorded webinar, just to have you go look at here a little bit better. Here it is where you can see it. So if you listen to that webinar, I'll tell you how to navigate it. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Walker.
Thank you, Lori. Okay, time for another quick poll. Ready, Lori?
I'm trying to, wrong one, okay.
Because I am working from home, I no longer have to worry about records management. True or false? Or yes or no? Awesome, yes. Worrying about records management is something that we have to do daily. As we continue to work remotely, it is probably more important now than ever to ensure we are practicing good records management. Uh-oh. False, yes, perfect. I'm glad to see that. Why worry about records management? If we don't manage our information, it will continue to accumulate. Personally identifying information, or PII, may be inadvertently released and end up in the wrong hands. It can cost money and resources to resolve issues associated with improper files management. It creates inefficiencies. And we are still required to produce records. Uh-oh, sorry, technical difficulty. We are still required to produce records if we have them, even if the retention is lapsed from the retention schedule. We may have to respond to Public Records Acts investigations, litigation, and or audit. So if we have those records and we haven't been record stewards, then we may have to produce them even though they're invaluable for the university. We like to think that all of our emails are special, don't we? But in fact, most of about 80% of our emails are transitory in nature, meaning that they have no historical or business value for the university anymore. It's important that we take the time to delete that information to make sure that we're continuing to be good stewards of our information. Next slide. Thanks, Lori. So what can we do? Take 15 minutes out of your day or so to organize your information. Stay organized. Create to-do lists with deadlines. Create subfolders with labels and tags. That will help you stay efficient and eliminate clutter for you. Manage your time efficiently. Designate specific times for email review throughout the day. Don't toggle back and forth between working and email because it becomes inefficient for you. And most importantly, unsubscribe for information that you no longer use or need, like lists or blogs, informational emails. Do you really still need that email from 2 years ago for an invitation to a seminar that you didn't get to attend? Think about ways that you can continue to be good records managers. It's individually our responsibility. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. This is Carolyn Tuft. I'm from UC San Francisco, and I'm going to talk a little bit about collaborative workspaces and how to manage information in them. But before we jump into that, there is another quick poll, and we'll try to leave it up a little bit longer. Lori, if you can launch the poll.
Can't seem to get to it.
Okay. All right. Technical difficulty. Oh, there we go. Please take a moment. So using your personal device, how do you feel about that? We'll give it a couple more moments for people to respond. All right. And I think we're going to call it because it looks like pretty much everybody is on board that it is true if you are using your personal device. It does mean you may end up with UC records stored on that device, and that means UC at some point may need to have a look at it. All right. See if I can move to the next slide. Oh. Hang on. So let's talk a little bit about collaborative workspaces and some of the different tools that we use when we're working with information across the university, especially as we are all sheltering in place. So I'd like to bring up the fact that a lot of these are collaboration tools and they are intended to hold information in more of a transitory manner. So there are a few things to think about when using them. So one is with tools like Slack and Microsoft Teams that have project channels. Think about how you're organizing your channels. You may want to set it up so you have one project per channel or one subject per channel. So that way, when that project or that work process is completed and that information isn't needed any longer, it's easy to delete it. It gets a little more complicated if you have multiple projects in one channel and maybe one project ends and another one is still going. So that's something to think about. Again, a lot of these tools are meant to be transitory in nature and not long-term record repositories. So keep that in mind. Think about it as a transitory place. And if you have records that need to be stored for a long time, use your local designated location for that storage. Another best practice, use links when you're sharing documents rather than sending the documents around. That way you can centralize and use one document as your source of truth. And you don't end up with a lot of extra documents that people need to file from their email and then have to go back and try to find in their email or in another location. Also, keep it safe. This is a really big topic. I think we hear about stories in the news all the time of records being released when they shouldn't be. So think about it. Think about the information that you have, what's contained in it, and where should it be kept. So if you have something that has personally identifiable information or personal health information, make sure it's put into a repository that has the appropriate security and controls. Just a side note about that. And controlling access. Think about who can see the information within that location. Is it the right people? Do they have the right permissions to do the work that they need to do? And a best practice is to periodically review the information and look at who can see it. So, is there somebody in there who maybe is no longer on the project? Is there somebody who doesn't have the right level of permissions? It's good to just go and have a look every now and again to make sure that the permissions and the controls are up to date. And as has been mentioned, keep in mind, we are a public institution and we are subject to the California Public Records Act. So it is entirely possible that at some point somebody may request the records and we will need to turn them over. So there are a couple of ways to make that a little easier on yourself by following our record retention schedule so we don't keep information longer than we need to. And also thinking about what you write. So when you're writing things down, it's really easy to be very informal in these collaborative tools. But at some point we may turn that over as a record. So it's just something to bear in mind when you're there. Okay. So let's see if I'll get to the next slide. It seems like it's taking a moment. Hey, Lori, can you hit next slide?
Be frozen. There.
Okay. All right. So I don't recommend this as a best practice for managing your records, but I have definitely felt this sentiment at times where I've wanted to organize things in the way I would like to shred them. But speaking of doing things with records that can give you joy, we'll move on to the next slide. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Marie Kondo, but it seems like she's everywhere. She is a professional organizer who has written a book and has a Netflix show, and one of her premises is, does this object give you joy? So mostly it's around organizing things in your home, but I think we can apply those same principles to our records. So I thought I'd look at it from the point of view as opposed to compliances. Does this record bring you joy? And there are a number of ways that a record can bring you joy. It makes me really happy when I know I have the current version. When I know I'm keeping records according to the retention schedule and I know I need to have it and it's there. I know I've got it in the right place, so it's got the appropriate security controls and the appropriate access controls. It makes me really happy when I need to produce a record for litigation and I'm able to do that. Nobody likes to tell the legal team, no, I don't have it. And also just deleting things based on the retention schedule. It's a nice feeling to know when you get rid of something that it is completely okay and authorized to do so. There are a few ways that records don't give me joy. Keeping things way past retention, often it's information, we don't need to keep it. It's cluttering up your search results. It's, taking up visual space when you look for something, and we just don't need to have that. Current versions, if you're not sure if it's the current version, I know we've all had that experience where it takes a lot of time and you're looking at it and trying to figure out, is this the most recent one? Doesn't make me happy. Knowing if it's the record version or a copy. If it's a copy, you don't need to keep it. You only need to keep it as long as you need to use it. And then last but not least, knowing where your information is and what that information is. So, if somebody asked you, if there was, hopefully there won't be, but if there is a a data breach on a server or another location and somebody says, well, what information was there? You really want to be able to answer that question because that can determine how we respond to that data breach. So definitely try to stay on the yes side of this column. And I'll wrap it up quickly. Final words from records management. I'd like to thank all of you for taking time to listen to this part of the presentation. If you have questions, please contact your local records management coordinator. A list of them is available on the UCOP website. This event, as you know, is being recorded and that will be made available. And I would like to go ahead and introduce the next speaker, Pega Parsi. She is going to cover some very interesting and important privacy issues. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Carolyn. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. Okay. Welcome. My name is Pega Parsi. I am the Campus Privacy Officer at UC San Diego, and I'm going to talk to you briefly about what privacy is here for UC. As always, I like to start by talking about what we mean when we're talking about privacy. This is my standard slide that I give at every presentation, so I hope those of you that have sat through something with me before have probably seen this already. So what are we talking about when we're discussing privacy? Privacy, let's start by saying what it is not. Privacy is not just about secrecy or confidentiality. It's much, much broader than that. It's not just about walling yourself off. So what we are talking about when we discuss privacy is the ability of a person, of an individual, to exercise control over themselves. So having that agency to know what is happening to oneself and to understand the decisions that are being made about oneself. That includes decisions that are being made about our bodies, about our communications, and of course, in this day and age, about our personal data. And I'll remind everyone that personal data is much broader than things just like name and social security number or email address. It's a much broader definition than that. And so what we mean is exercising control over our own domains. And in this particular case, we're going to focus mostly on personal data. Privacy, of course, is very much based on ethics, trust, and giving autonomy to the individual. And that means being very transparent with everyone about the personal data that we process about them. So we'll talk about all of these things in just a second. But privacy is more than all of these things. Privacy is also very important to the ethical treatment of people and of individuals and groups, excuse me, and a respectful workforce. But beyond that, it's also a very important part for us, especially as a research institution, freedom of inquiry, freedom of thought, freedom of research, openness in research, and of course, free speech on our campuses. Beyond even that, privacy is very important to a healthy and successful democracy. It's very important for social movements to gain traction and for us to advance. But privacy is not the end-all be-all of all things. It is absolutely balanced against all of the other social values that we have, such as things like student success, things like public health or national security. So we always want to keep that balance in mind, and I'll talk to you about where to go to get help with doing that sort of balancing test. Now, as a very large public research and education institution, many privacy laws apply to us. Of course, there's FERPA that you're familiar with and HIPAA that you're familiar with, but then there are lots of other ones. We also give financial aid, so the GLBA applies. Obviously, the IPA applies. Then there are employment laws, foreign jurisdiction laws. Different states have different laws, libraries, research records, drones have their own, automated license plate readers. There are a ton of privacy laws that apply to us as a global research institution. These are just, a few that I thought of to put in front of you. Not to overwhelm anyone, but privacy, as you may have noticed, has become a totally different animal than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago, right? Because of this boom in technology and our use of big data, privacy has just completely transformed in the last few years. So you are going to see a lot of new laws popping up, whether it's at state level or the national level. Different bills being proposed. Sometimes privacy is embedded in other types of laws. So we want to be careful that we don't assume that it's only FERPA that applies or that it's only HIPAA that applies. There are lots and lots of other things. So what we did on our campus at UC San Diego was come up with a list of privacy principles, and we've committed to following those principles, regardless of whether or not a law is directly on point for us. So instead of trying to find the specific law that applies to a specific thing and saying that we're only going to comply with that, we are committing to complying with those privacy principles for everyone, everywhere. So as I speak on our campus, the law is certainly the floor for us. We don't want to fall below the floor. We always want to comply with the relevant laws, but that is not sufficient for privacy. That's not sufficient to show that we are good stewards of people's information that we have. We want to go well above that. So things like ethics, and again, balancing with other values that we have for our community is very, very important. Ethical considerations are incredibly important to privacy. I'll just leave it at that. But privacy also touches lots of functions across campus. I thought of a few that are sort of high touch points, but there are lots of other ones. We certainly, obviously, work with our public records colleagues, our information security folks, and law enforcement, certainly, especially these days. Institutional research uses a lot of personal data to run analytics and do reporting. Advancement does a lot of things like donor research, and anyone that's been involved with Blackbaud recently will know that. HR, obviously, and IT. Any sort of IT project that we have may be collecting personal information in one way or other. Even when it's something as simple as just device ID or IP addresses, those are considered under many laws to be personal information. So privacy touches lots of different things that we do on our campus. And so because of that, I thought maybe I'd give you some examples of different types of campus activities that might have potential privacy implications. There are many, many more, but here's just a smattering of them. Any sort of use of ed tech, whether that's for proctoring, that is for classroom discussion forums, has the potential to collect personal data, and in fact, it often does. Any sort of data analysis that we do, particularly in the realm of diversity initiatives for campus improvement and that sort of thing. Study abroad programs can potentially subject us to laws of other countries, including the privacy laws of other countries. Recruiting of students, faculty, staff, what have you, and research participants, by the way. Public records requests, of course, involve, as you've heard from our other colleagues. I want to just say research for this bullet, but when I say research, people tend to think of medical research or clinical trials. I want to make sure that we're talking about any sort of research that is collecting personal information. So the things that tend to be overlooked are things like mobile apps, things like wearables, things like your Fitbits and those sorts of things. Anything doing machine learning using personal data, anything that is looking at an algorithm or studying AI or anything like that has the potential to implicate privacy for us. So we want to keep those top of mind when we are thinking about privacy. International collaborations, similar to study abroad programs, can subject us to other laws of other countries. And then there's the run-of-the-mill stuff, the things that we think of when we think of privacy. putting up security cameras that's recording your lab or your building or whatever, biometric access, or automatic license plate readers. Those have specific laws that apply to them. Any sort of donor prospect research involves very sensitive information. We want to make sure we bring in our privacy officials for those, mailing lists of any sort, not just alumni ones. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that all of your campus reopening plans include some level of personal data processing, whether that's isolation housing, testing, symptom surveys, proximity tracking, exposure notification. All of those involve personal data. Again, there are lots and lots of others. This was just to give you a taste of what what we're looking at here. Of course, there's a lot of stuff, and no one is expecting everyone on campus to be an expert on this. That is why we have our campus privacy officials at each of our campuses. And I see several of them are on this call today. They are welcome to jump in and add anything that they want to what I'm saying here. But they're here to help you with this. They're here to help you balance these sorts of things and figure out what things might be high risk and might be high touch, or what is relatively low risk in terms of privacy. So I've said a lot here. I do want to give shameless plugs to say, get to know your campus privacy official. If you do not know who your campus privacy official is, this is a link, and we'll send this out afterwards. You can see it on the ECAS website. They're a delightful group of people, and they're all very, very thoughtful. And we meet on a regular basis to discuss all of the privacy matters that go on at our university. The other shameless plug is for the Privacy 101 workshop that I put on once a month. It is open to everyone, anywhere. And in fact, now that we're virtual, we're getting hits from abroad, and we've had several people internationally attending. So this is here for you. Right now, my website is under construction, but at some point you can go to privacy.ucsd.edu. I do have my contact information here in case anybody has anything they want to ask me specifically. You're welcome to do that. Though I would tell you, if you are from another campus, your campus privacy official is the best place to start, and they're wonderful. Okay, now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, David. And let me stop my share.
Great, thank you, Pega. And thank you everyone for coming today. I see we have about 430 participants on. That's fantastic. And as a reminder, October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. For those of you that aren't aware, every October we put together, the whole nation puts together events, and UC specifically, to educate, have some fun, and learn about cybersecurity. So just a quick reminder to everybody, if you haven't gone to our wonderful, exciting NCSAM website, I really encourage you to do so. You can find it off of security.ucop.edu, and we will also put, and Ronice has already done it, put the link in the chat as well. By the way, you can get these awesome Zoom backgrounds. We've customized them for every location, has your campus's logo there. So please feel free to use those. We'd love to see those in the backgrounds throughout the month of October. So I really appreciate all the feedback I've seen in the chat, also the comments from our presenters, and they've really hit a lot of core things. And when I talk about security, I always like to try to keep it personal, right? What can we relate it somehow to our personal lives as opposed to just something technology oriented? So I'm going to ask just in the chat, because people seem to be very comfortable with that. Let's talk about something you're very familiar with, which is the pandemic we're in and everything we're having to do to keep ourselves and our loved ones and community protected. Just tell me one thing, just one simple thing that you can do to protect yourself from any type of flu. And all you need to do is just type in the chat briefly. And I'm just going to give folks maybe 15 seconds to do that. So social distancing, wearing masks, washing your hands, washing hands often, stay home. I think many of us are staying home or working remotely these days. Great. So people understand this. there's been an enormous amount of information put out there to educate and tell people these things. And guess what? Some of those things you probably should have been doing all the way along. It's not some magical thing that washing your hands is great this year, but it wasn't great last year when you went and visited relatives and such, right? You should be washing your hands all the time. It's a really good practice. And so when we talk about cybersecurity, you really want to keep good practices that are helpful to you, helpful to your community, and help us complete and steward records within the University of California. One simple thing, these issues around cybersecurity are always kind of scary, right? Let me give you an example of what I mean. When we talk about the threats to UC. So I'm going to try to share just a slide here briefly to give folks an idea. Hopefully people will be able to see it. All right. So what kind of threats affect the University of California, right? Because we as a global institution, we do education, we do research, we do healthcare, and we have government aspects as well. And all these things that make up the wonder of UC are also very high targets to cyber espionage. So other countries like China and Russia and so forth, trying to get in and get information out of us. Cyber crime, criminal syndicates that are trying to defraud us and take money away from the mission of UC. Hacktivism, folks who may want to disrupt the ability of UC to actually perform its mission. And also insider threats. So some of those are intentional and some are just inadvertent. Somebody just makes a mistake, right? So those four things come against our entire institution, and we really work to try to protect ourselves. You know, why do people come against UC? We have such a diverse infrastructure and such a large amount of volume, and we have high bandwidth. So it's very, very attractive to other bad actors. We have a lot of monetizable data, not just PI and PHI as I note in the slide, but also our research data on COVID and things like that. We work with a lot of third parties, so sometimes there can be cross-compromise across those things in our private-public sector collaboration. And there's so much information here and such a distributed structure, it's easy for somebody to try to target one of our areas to try to compromise the other. And so I always tell folks, you know, if you think about your, you know, what can I do personally? Think about the things that, like, you live in a neighborhood or an apartment building or a condominium. Everybody has different keys to their homes, right? But how about you had the same key for everybody's house? Wouldn't that be easier? Just one key gets you into everybody's apartments and homes and neighborhoods and buildings? It sounds ludicrous, right? But I can tell you from experience, people use the same UC password on these other sites they go to, be it social media sites or shopping sites, etc. Please don't use the same password on those sites. Really, because those sites get compromised, you are not a secret. People can find out where you work, and then they use your password to get into accounts here. It happens. It's easily preventable, and I really strongly encourage you to do that. I also encourage you to use multi-factor authentication from whatever the provider is in order to secure your accounts, okay? Because that's how bad guys are getting in. The other thing, and I think Kelly mentioned this earlier, was delete, delete, delete. Don't keep things you don't need. And this is a common thing. We have records, there's things we have to archive and keep, but there's a lot of what I'll call transitory or working data that we have, and some of it has sensitive information, and it kind of gets forgotten about or left on file shares or in folders and out in different places. Please clean it up and delete it, because those things invariably lead to breach notifications, enormous amounts of work by people to have to clean up, to respond to notify affected individuals. So it's really, really important that we focus on trying to make sure you clean up and delete that data as much as possible. And, you know, I felt a little left out earlier because everybody had, a few people had a cat meme going on earlier. And then people asked me, well, you know, what's it like to deal with cybersecurity at UC? And it's sort of like this, right? There's this big universe. And I feel like this little cat here with mouth agape and eyes wide. But what I realized in that big universe is that all of you are part of the solution. All of you help me make my job easier, but also help steward and protect the University of California data, which is so critical to our mission. I also wanted to point out a couple things in closing. One, if you don't know your local Chief Information Security Officer or security team, please reach out and have virtual coffee with them. Talk to them, get to know them. It's much better to get to know them before anything bad happens, but also to get their advice and insight, because they are very much willing to do that for you. And again, your final homework, and I'm trying to keep time for Q&As for folks, is to please go to our National Cybersecurity Awareness Month site. Please download your local Zoom background for the month. Please use it, please promote it, please tell your colleagues. And we hope to see you at our Cybersecurity Summit that's coming up on October 14th. So thank you.
Terrific. So now we have some time to actually go back to the chat and answer some of these questions. So the first question is, when does a piece of information become a record for an archive?
When it's no longer needed where you are is the baseline. You don't want to send something to the archives that you might need to use again, because once it comes to us, it's harder to get it back out. So when you no longer need it, that's the best time.
This one is specific to UCI, so I'm going to generalize it. What happens when a staff member leaves and their whole email account is deleted or inaccessible? And I just going to talk about this in generalities, and that is that each one of our locations has different ways that they deal with offboarding employees. And it should be that before the employee leaves, that they get together with their manager and make sure that the records that they have that are needed by everybody else are transferred into the custody of somebody else. Which doesn't mean that the whole PST has to go to somebody. It just means that those records that are in there that are needed for the day-to-day business or the retention period has not lapsed need to be transferred into somebody else's care. Anybody else want to say anything about that?
You might want to try to clean your records as much as possible too. We discussed purging and personal information from business information. That'll make the job for the archivist a lot easier when it comes to culling a collection for you.
How secure is Box or Microsoft Teams? David, do you want to go for that one?
So in terms of how secure Box and Microsoft Teams is, in general, these solutions are fairly secure if they're used properly and if they're behind multi-factor authentication. I know Teams is a little bit different, but for our Box instance, for example, at UCOP, and hopefully at yours, Box, if you use that at your location, there's a multi-factor prompt to basically give us that extra layer of protection. So it's relatively secure. I think the challenge, we're less worried about Box as a company and them being hacked and changed. It could happen, but generally if there's a challenge around Box or Teams or these other solutions where you're storing files, it's why is that file out there? What's in that? And who has access to it? Because with many of these solutions, they are very powerful and useful, but you as the end user control who gets it. Is it an open link? Is it specific permissions? Is it, somebody has a link and gets to the file, and who has it? So again, we go back to don't keep anything out there that you don't need. And second, be very aware who is getting access to those files, because you have a responsibility to be a good steward and make sure that that's protected.
Right, and then somebody comments that they found that the Box features allow for more control about how people can view, download, and print. And that's probably true with most of these collaborative tools that we have available. In terms of cloud storage, could you provide a recommendation of Google Docs versus OneDrive and specific to employee personnel records? Again, I think that our job here is to help you make sure that whatever you're using is secure. I don't want to go into from one tool to another which one is better, and I don't think any of us want to go there, but you should be talking with your privacy officials, and your security officials about how you're storing your employee personnel records, and also your records management people as well. Then somebody said, I have not explored enough, but I have not been able to find such control available for MS Teams. But there's a great taxonomy workshop from last year, and there's a YouTube for that. So I'm just going to go on because there's no question there. Again, this one doesn't look like it's a question. We're running out of time, so I just want to go to the next one. How should we handle files that are split between the individual departments and the central service office? What is the recommended approach? For example, should we be informing departments to keep files, scans, etc.? Anybody want to go for that one?
From an archives perspective, there should be a primary office of record, and that would be the office that's responsible for retaining the records. Others may have a copy, and at some point they should be reviewing it in relation to the retention schedule, and make sure that they know that they're not the office of record.
So the retention schedule will not tell you who has the official record because that varies from location to location. There's often somebody that one of the locations might have a centralized approach to a certain kind of record, and other ones will have it at the department level. So you won't find that in the retention schedule itself. If you're trying to figure out who has the office of record, I recommend that you look at your local records management coordinator for some advice in helping tracking down if you have that or not. Is there a list of standard items expected in a personnel file? And I think one of the PPSMs has some information about that in there. Again, that's not something the records management people can dictate to you.
Lori, I will interject that records managers can assist with creating a file plan and determining which records are official records for your business department or whether there's another location that is the office of record for those, and we can assist with those processes.
Great. Now here's one about DocuSign. Working remotely requires me to create packets for signature via DocuSign, and this is our last question. Once such packets have been completed, I print them out for storage in financial files / binders. Are the electronic versions of such packets considered original? Also, should these be stored long-term in DocuSign or downloaded and moved to our departmental file share? I'm not real familiar with DocuSign, but it seems to me that if you're finding an alternate place to have your official record, then that could mean that you don't need to maintain it in DocuSign. But I really would have to ask you to look into that with your local records management coordinator so we can dive down into how you're using that system and make sure that's a good answer. I want to thank everybody for coming today. We appreciate it. We did not get through all the questions. We'll try to look at them and see if there's a way that we can post them online in a website. We plan on putting this recording into on a website as well as some of the tools that we've created for it. So we'll try to answer those questions there. Thank you again for your time and attention, and have a good day.